She thought I was out of town. She didn't know I'd be the one pulling out her chair at dinner, with divorce papers in my hand and proof of everything she tried to hide. Hey there. My name's Jack, and I'd like to share a bit about why I'm currently sitting in my kitchen at 2:30 on a Tuesday afternoon, when under normal circumstances I'd be at the office. You see, I'm trying to make sense of the 4 calls I've made and the 1 text I've sent since I sat down here. Let's check the clock. Yep, it's been almost 2 hours now. About an hour and 45 minutes of sitting still, staring into space, and 15 minutes of, well, 15 minutes that turned everything upside down. 15 minutes that shattered whatever normal I thought I had. I don't even know how many lives were affected by those 15 minutes, but I can tell you mine is one of them. Hold on, someone's knocking at the door. Oh hey sweetheart. Where's Eric? He came home early, Dad. Said he'd pick up Lily from preschool and take care of her until I get back. I nodded. Katie, I've said it before, but it's worth repeating, Eric's a solid man. I know it's practically tradition for a father to grumble about his son-in-law, but you really picked well. He's got a good heart. She gave me this half smile, tight and a little pained, the kind we share when life throws something bitter at us and all we've got left is that shared sense of humor. Have you told Pete yet, Dad? No. Your brother's out at sea, remember? I'll send him an email later. Probably easier that way. She sat down beside me, rested her hand on mine. I'm here for you, Dad. Whatever you need. Thanks, sweetheart. We sat there in silence. Not awkward, just heavy. The kind of silence that fills up all the empty space after the ground's been pulled out from under you. Why would she do this to you, Dad? I shook my head slowly. I don't know, baby. I really don't. Why wouldn't she say something? I sighed. I haven't actually talked to her yet. You mean, she's still upstairs? Yep. Katie's eyes flicked toward the staircase, toward the master bedroom. I could see the worry written all over her face. I think part of her was afraid of what might be said, or what couldn't be unsaid. I just figured, maybe we should all hear her explanation at the same time. So I asked a few folks to come by. They'll be here soon. Her eyes widened a bit. What are you planning to do? Nothing more, and nothing less, than what I need to do to make it through this. So you've already decided? Yep. Don't you think it might depend on why she did it? The facts are enough. Her reasons don't change what happened. But, what if she was coerced, or, what if someone forced her? I looked her in the eye. Katie, if you saw what I saw, and heard what I heard, you'd know. No one forced her. There's no blackmail here. She stared at me, trying to read between the lines. I thought you were holding it together, she said quietly, but I can see now, you're not. I turned away. I didn't want her to see my face. No daughter should have to watch her father fall apart. What can I do? She asked softly. You do whatever your heart tells you to do. I won't judge you either way. Thanks, Dad. Do you have even the slightest idea why she would do this? Not a clue, sweetheart. I really thought we had a good marriage. Right up until this morning. What happened this morning? I took a deep breath. Well, your mom's never been good at hiding things. Secrets, lies, they're just not part of who she is. After nearly 3 decades together, I know her too well. I know Melissa's routine like I know my own reflection. She's nothing if not consistent. Every morning, she showers without fail, especially on Tuesdays and Fridays when she takes the time to wash her hair. She's usually out and dressed in about an hour, give or take a few minutes. But this morning? She was in the bathroom for almost an hour and a half. That alone didn't sit right. It wasn't normal. And when I walked in to remind her she was running late, I caught a glimpse of what she was wearing underneath her robe, lingerie I hadn't seen in years, and the outfit laid out on the bed wasn't anything close to what she usually wears to the office. So I asked her casually, "What's on your schedule today?" She didn't even flinch. "Just a normal day at the office," she said, calm as ever. But I knew she was lying. Her tone was too smooth. And that's when it hit me, she had no intention of going to work. Usually if she was even 5 minutes behind schedule, she'd get all flustered, rushing around, muttering about traffic and meetings. But today? She was cool as ice. That was my first undeniable sign. "So what did you do, Dad?" Katie asked. "I called off work," I replied. "Told them I wasn't feeling well. Then I parked my car just down the street and waited." "You followed her?" "Not exactly. I was planning to, but she never left." Katie's eyes widened slightly. I sat in the car waiting, watching the house. Around 11:30, a man showed up, Brent, the guy she works with at the real estate firm. I recognized him right away. Katie looked down. She knew who he was. I let myself in quietly, just enough to confirm what I already suspected. She didn't ask me what I saw. She didn't have to. After that, I stepped back outside, sat in my car again, and thought through my next move. I made a few phone calls, set things in motion. And now, well, here we are. Were there any signs before today? She asked, her voice soft. I thought about it. There were hints. I guess I just didn't want to believe them. She stopped enjoying intimacy. At first, I chalked it up to stress or just aging. Katie looked away. She used to enjoy that closeness. But after she hit menopause a couple of years ago, everything changed. She stopped wanting to be touched. Stopped initiating. I thought maybe it was just a phase, but now I wonder if she was already gone long before today. There was a pause. Katie nodded slowly. So when you caught her today, it must have hit you hard. I didn't say a word. I just held her gaze, steady, quiet, cold. She saw the answer in my eyes. Then came another soft knock at the door. When I opened it, I found Paul, my father-in-law, standing there. Come on in, Paul. Thanks, Jack. Where is she? Upstairs. In our room. He gave a short nod, but his face was a mess of confusion and sadness. That doesn't sound like blackmail, does it? Katie asked me, barely above a whisper. No, I said flatly. No, it doesn't. She looked at me frustrated. How can you just sit here? Why don't you go up there and throw them out yourself? I let out a long breath. It's not easy, sweetheart. But I've learned how to detach. Shut off my emotions when I need to. I don't like it, but it's how I've managed to stay composed. She gave a small, sad smile. So that's where I get it from. Maybe, I said. So why stay down here? Why not go up there and end it? There's one more person I wanted to be here first. And almost like it had been scripted, we heard another knock. I opened the door to find Jenny, Melissa's closest friend from college, standing there looking composed, calm, and heartbreakingly prepared. She was a few years younger than Melissa, but always had that no-nonsense air about her. Jenny didn't say much. She just pulled out her phone, called the locksmith and her attorney, and gave them both the go-ahead. While she handled business, we kept the kids distracted downstairs, chatting about silly things, doing whatever we could to keep them away from what was unraveling above. Then Jenny straightened her shoulders. All right, she said with quiet steel in her voice. Let's go. Katie, and I made our way up the stairs while the children stayed below, waiting for our signal. Jenny paused at the bedroom door, pressed her lips into a line and peered inside. I gave a quiet signal to the others to stay out of sight, then stepped into the bedroom alone. There I was, standing at the foot of the bed, fighting the wave of disgust washing over me. The man beside my wife was sitting up, startled, a sheet awkwardly covering him. His name, as I just discovered from the ID in his wallet, left carelessly in his pants downstairs, was John Smith. Fitting in a strange, bitter way. Not exactly the brightest idea, I said coldly. Leaving your wallet in your trousers downstairs, John? That clearly rattled them. Good. A little consequence never hurt the guilty. I turned to Melissa. Just curious, I said, my voice tight. Why did you choose to end our marriage like this? You had to know that catching you in bed with someone else would destroy me. For the first time since all this started, I saw something flicker in her expression. Shame. She finally looked like she understood what she'd done. I'm sorry, Jack, she whispered. We didn't mean for it to happen. We just fell in love. I nodded slowly. I can accept that love happens where it does. But you could have ended things with me before all this. You could have dealt with your feelings in a way that didn't involve sneaking around and betraying your family. Her partner, if you could call him that, looked like he wished he were anywhere else. I think reality was finally settling in. That's when Paul, my father-in-law, spoke up behind me. When Jack called me, I wanted to believe it wasn't true. I didn't think you'd be capable of something like this, Melissa. But now, seeing it with my own eyes, there's no coming back from this. No apology in the world can fix what I just saw. Silence followed. Not a word, just Melissa breaking down into muffled sobs, shaking in the bed she'd once shared with me. Well, Mom, Katie said from the hallway, her voice icy and sharp. If you've got nothing left to say, then I'll go ahead and say it all. She stepped inside beside me, arms crossed. We won't need you to babysit Lily this weekend. In fact, we won't be needing you around much at all. Melissa opened her mouth, likely to protest, but I cut her off. Oh, and as for your brilliant idea of shacking up and playing house together, I added, looking between them, I wouldn't count on either of you having a paycheck to support it. What do you mean? Melissa asked, her voice barely audible. Your boss, Mr. Johnson, sends his regards. He wanted to deliver the message himself, but neither of you were answering your phones. You're both fired. He took issue with two married employees conducting an affair on company time. Can't say I blame him. You didn't? She whispered. Tell me you didn't tell him. Oh, I did. And I sent him a few pictures too. John's face turned pale. How did you know I'm married? I smirked. Well, your driver's license did most of the talking. He dropped his gaze to the floor, guilt painted all over his face. Later I'd learn it was John who initiated the affair. But the whole test drive at lunch idea? That had been Melissa's suggestion. Apparently he'd planned to tell his wife and kids the next day, honestly believing he could explain this away. He glanced at a framed photo on the dresser. His family. He couldn't even meet their eyes in that picture. Danny, the lawyer I'd called to the house for support, finally lost his composure. His voice shook, but he pulled himself together long enough to say, Kids, if you've ever wondered what betrayal looks like, take a good look. Melissa visibly winced under the weight of all those eyes, her daughter's, her father's, and now mine. Later that week, Jenny, the attorney, sat down with me to explain that in divorce court, judges sometimes have the discretion to deviate from standard division of assets when there's clear evidence of premeditated deceit. And in our case, well, there was no shortage of that. Linda insisted on hearing the audio recordings, the ones I'd captured when I realized something was off. She needed to know the truth about her mother. We sat side by side, headphones in, listening to every word. And by the end we were both in shock. The bitterness. The planning. The way Melissa talked about me when she thought I wasn't listening, it wasn't just selfish. It was cold. Calculated. Linda called her mother afterward. Demanded some kind of explanation. But whatever excuses Melissa tried to offer, they weren't enough. There was no misunderstanding. No justification. Just a trail of lies and a woman who'd buried her family beneath them. I tried to hold it together, for Linda mostly. She's strong, but I didn't want her seeing just how badly this was tearing me apart. And when Pete called from the ship, I mustered up my best everything's fine voice. He didn't need to hear his old man falling apart from the other side of the world. But the truth? I was barely getting through the days. That weekend, after the whole mess came to light, Jenny stopped by. I was sitting out back just staring at nothing. She walked up slowly, kind of hesitant, and said, I got a voicemail from Rob. Not sure what to make of it. I waved it off gently. Don't stress about it, Jen. Right now, the only person Rob should be getting support from is a therapist. She let out a breath I didn't realize she was holding. We spent the next hour talking logistics, sorting out the fallout, the pieces that needed picking up. Then she asked me the one thing I wasn't prepared to answer. How about you, Jack? Are you okay? I paused, and for once I didn't try to fake it. I don't know, Jenny. Honestly, I'm just lost. I keep asking myself what I did to deserve this. What did I do that made Melissa hate me enough to throw everything away? I rubbed my hands together, still shaking slightly. Seeing her in bed with him, it broke something in me. It made me question everything, my worth, my manhood. Was I not enough? Had I failed so badly as a husband that she sought comfort in someone else? Jenny sat beside me in silence, just listening. She wrecked her relationship with our kids. Even her own father. And still, I keep trying to figure out what I missed. I spent the next few weeks trying to keep up appearances. But every spare moment, every quiet hour, I was watching them, Melissa and John, keeping tabs on their new reality. Since our joint accounts were frozen by the lawyers, they couldn't exactly run off and play house like they planned. Melissa was crashing with one of her few remaining friends, and John was doing the same on his end. They'd meet up most evenings, whisper in parking lots, linger in cafes, then part ways before midnight. I watched. I waited. I needed something more than just pain, I needed purpose. Once I'd tracked enough of their routine, I called Jenny late on a Thursday. My voice was low, steady. Tomorrow night, I said. It's time. What's happening at 3 and 10? She asked. You'll know when it's done. That next evening I saw red. Not metaphorically. It felt physical, my chest burning, vision narrowed to a tunnel. But somewhere in the storm, reason cut through. I didn't lose control. I followed the last steps of the plan. John didn't see it coming. I approached from the shadows, took him by surprise, and before long, he was lying unconscious in the middle of the road. I placed him just so, like an unfortunate victim of a late-night hit and run. Maybe that's how the police would read it. Or maybe not. Didn't matter. I left him there, silent and still. Back at my bike, I rode to the outlet mall 2 towns over. In the shadows behind the loading dock, I changed out of my clothes, pulled on a fresh set from a backpack, tossed the old ones and my gloves into the dumpster, and rode another mile before parking. Jenny's house wasn't far. I pushed the bike the last few blocks, quietly, avoiding cameras and lights. She was waiting by the back gate when I arrived. No words, just a nod. Later that night, right on cue, the police came knocking. Turns out the license plate had been flagged. Someone had reported a possible assault, and my bike had been seen near the scene. They had questions. But luck, or planning, was on my side. That night, like every Friday for the past couple of months, my car had been parked outside Jenny's place. Her nosy neighbor confirmed it, had seen it parked there more than once a week. "He always stays over," she chirped helpfully to the officers. "Sleeps in the spare room." What she didn't know was that I hadn't set foot in that spare room for quite some time. I was never a real suspect, not officially. Still, people talk. And Tracy, well, she needed answers. When she asked me point blank if I'd been the one to put her precious John in the hospital, I didn't lie. "Yeah," I told her. "That was me." Her mouth fell open. "But why? He never did anything to you." I stared at her. "Really, Tracy? You don't see it?" I shook my head, almost laughing, though there was nothing funny about any of this. "Maybe the affair dulled your brain quicker than I thought. The moment I walked in and saw you sprawled out under him like it was nothing, it broke something in me. It ripped my pride out by the roots. It made me question my worth as a man, my ability to make a woman feel wanted. It made me wonder what I'd become to you, some dull fixture in your life just taking up space." She looked stunned, like she hadn't even considered what that kind of betrayal might do to someone's sense of self. Maybe she hadn't. Maybe she'd been too wrapped up in her little fantasy to notice she'd lit the match that burned our whole world down. "And now," she asked quietly, "can you forgive me?" "Forgive you?" I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "No. But I can move on. Mostly because there's nothing left of us to salvage." She opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off. "Don't thank me, Tracy. I'm not the one you need to be afraid of." Her brows pulled together. "What do you mean?" "I already had my moment with Johnny Boy," I said with a calm shrug. "But his wife? She hasn't even started with you yet. And between you and me, she's not the kind of woman who lets betrayal slide." Right then, like something out of a twisted sitcom, a woman's voice called down the stairs. Smooth, sultry, confident. "You coming back to bed, Jack? You promised me 6 orgasms a day and you're behind schedule." Tracy blinked, trying to place the voice. I didn't explain. She didn't need to know who she was. Only that I'd moved on. In a way, I suppose that voice, its timing, its edge, was part of the closure I didn't know I needed. Funny thing is, I've actually thought about asking Jenny to walk me down the aisle if I ever get married again. Why not? She saw me through the worst of it, never judged, just stood by me while I patched myself together. And I mean it, if I hadn't taken a stand, if I hadn't acted, gotten some form of closure, I don't know if I ever would have been able to have a normal life again. But now, let's shift gears. Let's look at it from her side. I'm Tracy. And let me tell you, my life has completely unraveled over the past 2 years. Back then, when all this started, I thought I had my reasons. At least, I thought they made sense. Now I'm not so sure. What I did last week, well, that's going to take a lot more time to explain. Even to myself. Looking back, my marriage with Jack was solid. Not perfect, but stable. He was kind, dependable, loyal. But the spark? That spark I used to feel? It had dulled into something quieter, something I mistook for emptiness. And then, John showed up. He brought something new, something exciting. The kind of butterflies I hadn't felt in years. And suddenly, I started questioning everything. It wasn't just lust, it was the idea of being desired. Of being seen. Carol, a friend of mine, wasn't exactly helpful. She egged me on, saying things like, "What if he's terrible in bed? What if it's all a fantasy?" And I know this sounds shallow, but when sex is already a rare thing in your marriage and you're closing in on middle age, you start to wonder if your next chance might be your last. At that point, for me, sex wasn't just about physical gratification. It was about connection. Intimacy. Feeling something that reminded me I was still alive, still wanted. Still. I didn't expect everything to implode the way it did. I didn't expect it to be like that with John. I really didn't. Dave, for all his quiet ways, had always been attentive, gentle, patient, and, well, fulfilling in every way that counted. But with John, there was something reckless about it. Something I mistook for passion. That impulsive spark, the heat of doing something forbidden, it clouded everything. That's what led to the moment that finally destroyed what was left of my marriage. The first time John and I were together, it didn't last long. Guilt crept in almost immediately. I couldn't get the image out of my head. My father standing in the doorway, the disappointment in my daughter's voice. And John's daughter, The way she looked at me like I was a stranger. Like I was the villain in someone else's story. That hurt more than I could have imagined. When the hospital called me about John, I already knew, deep in my gut, that Dave had something to do with it. It wasn't even a question. I didn't need confirmation. I just knew. John's injuries were brutal. A shattered groin, a broken jaw, ribs cracked like brittle sticks, bruised kidneys, and a tibia that would never quite be the same again. The doctors said it looked like he'd been hit by a car. A hit and run, they called it. But I knew it wasn't random. I went to see Dave not to argue but to explain, maybe even beg a little. I wanted to ease the pain between us, to try and salvage whatever was left of the wreckage. But he wouldn't even let me start. As soon as I opened my mouth, he shut it down. His tone was cold, his face unreadable, like he'd buried every trace of the man I used to know. And when he said it, flat out, no emotion, "Yeah, I did it," I froze. I didn't recognize him. Not his voice, not his expression. It was like looking at a stranger who wore my husband's face. But then he told me why. Why he'd done it. And honestly, I got it. I didn't like it. It didn't help with the guilt I already carried, but I understood. I could finally see what I had taken from him, not just his pride but his manhood, his sense of worth. I had emasculated him, humiliated him in front of everyone he loved. In front of himself. And yet, a part of me still couldn't understand why he hated John so intensely. That is, until he explained. That's when the truth hit me like a slap to the face. What I didn't know, what John hadn't told me or maybe didn't want to admit, was that after everything blew up, his body started to betray him. That one remaining testicle? It stopped working. His body couldn't produce enough testosterone on its own, and he couldn't afford the therapy to fix it. He couldn't perform. At all. He became distant. Angry. Possessive. He snapped at me over nothing. And the harder I tried to hold things together, the more he pulled away. A marriage built on infidelity and secrecy, it doesn't have strong foundations. I see that now. A friend of mine had mentioned hormone therapy, how it helped her. So I tried it. Quietly. Never rubbing John's face in the fact that I was still seeking satisfaction elsewhere. I assumed his silence that Thursday night and again the next morning was a form of reluctant approval. But after a sad short evening with my new lover, one that ended in disappointment and him falling asleep from sheer embarrassment, I drove home to the trailer John and I were sharing. He wasn't there. Then I heard the sirens. I followed them, my stomach in knots. I didn't need to ask. Somehow I already knew. John had taken his own life. Dawn, his sister, had found him. Hanging from a tree behind their childhood home. And just like that, I'd done it again. I'd destroyed another man. The weight of that realization still hasn't left me. Even as I sat alone that night, I braced myself for the consequences. I knew Dave would have his own kind of justice planned. He always saw things through, especially when he was hurt. This time, I wasn't going to run from it. I was surprised when I finally got the report. Turns out, it was just a suicide note. That's all John left behind. Short, bitter, final. But Melissa knew. She knew exactly what I was capable of. See, this wasn't the first time someone underestimated me. There were 2 separate occasions during our marriage where some loudmouth guys tried to make a move on her. Both times we were out at a bar or some social function, just the 2 of us. She politely declined their invitation to dance and even made it clear, firmly, that she was with me. But they weren't the kind to take no for an answer. They brushed her off and grabbed her by the arm, trying to pull her out of her seat. Right in front of me. I guess they figured because they looked tough, I'd just sit there and let them walk off with my wife like she was a prize they could claim. They guessed wrong. And Melissa never forgot how quickly I handled it. Both times it ended the same, quick, decisive, and a very clear message sent. I didn't tolerate disrespect then, and I sure wasn't going to start now. After 3 months of digging, the private investigator finally handed me the folder I'd been dreading. Inside were the photos, the recordings, the text messages, the truth. No more guessing. No more wondering if I was just being paranoid. There it was. All of it. I reviewed everything, video clips, audio files, high-res images, and once I had seen enough, I picked up the phone and called my lawyer, Mac. Get the divorce papers ready, I told him. I want them in my hands by Wednesday afternoon. Because I had a plan. Melissa, clever as she thought she was, had no idea that I wasn't actually out of town. She had a date lined up with her boss on Thursday night. I'd overheard her confirm it on an audio recording. Said she was free Thursday if he still wanted to meet up. He didn't hesitate, eagerly offered to set it up. Classy guy. The PI firm had helped me install discreet monitoring software on Melissa's phone a few weeks earlier. It let me access copies of her texts, her emails, everything. They even had a live team ready, keeping an eye on her location and prepared to notify me the moment she arrived at the restaurant. And that night, I got the message. "They're seated," the text read. "Drinks just arrived." I parked around the corner, took a moment to steady my breathing and stepped out of the car. Walking through the doors of that restaurant felt surreal. There was a buzz in the air, glasses clinking, low conversation, the hum of a Thursday night out. The hostess recognized me instantly. I'd called ahead and tipped generously. She gave me a soft smile and a small nod, understanding exactly what I was there for. She'd seated them at a more private table in the back, just like I'd asked. I adjusted the divorce papers under my arm, rolled my shoulders back and took a deep breath. It was time. I kept my fury sealed behind a mask of calm, every breath carefully measured as I approached their table. There they were. Melissa sat across from him, all dolled up in a deep burgundy cocktail dress that I hadn't seen before. She looked stunning, sure, but it wasn't for me. She leaned toward her boss, that same practiced smile on her lips. The way she gazed at him made my stomach turn. I stepped up to their table, cool and composed. My voice was smooth, even. "Jeremy," I said with a polite nod. "Do you know what's kept Melissa and me happily married for the last 15 years? He blinked, startled, then glanced at Melissa, who had gone pale. "Honesty and trust," I continued. "Simple values, but the foundation of everything." He adjusted in his seat, clearing his throat. "I agree absolutely." "I already know, but let's play along," I said. "Are you married, Jeremy?" He nodded, almost proudly. "Yes, 20 years. 4 kids, ages 5 to 13. My wife Sarah and I, we take our vows seriously. Trust and communication, that's everything in our home." I smiled tightly. "That's good to hear." Then I turned to Melissa. "And you, sweetheart? Do you feel the same? Is trust still something you value in our marriage?" She froze. Every second of hesitation was a sentence in itself. Then, with forced confidence, she said, "Of course, Jack. It's just business dinners. You know I'd never get involved with someone else, especially not my boss. Please don't turn this into something it's not." She tried to smile, but her voice cracked. "Jeremy, I'm sorry. My husband gets jealous sometimes." I bowed my head slightly and played the role. "She's right. I can be jealous. I mean, seeing my wife in a dress like that, it's hard not to worry." Then I took out the envelope. Slowly, deliberately, I laid out several photos on the white linen tablecloth, pictures of them kissing, holding hands, exchanging whispers in dim-lit corners. Jeremy's jaw tensed. I flipped through more of them. "Here's a fun one," I said. "Melissa, you look pretty comfortable with that in your mouth. And Jeremy, that expression? You look like you're having the time of your life." Melissa burst into tears. "Jack, please," she whispered, "stop." Other diners had begun to glance over. I lowered my voice, careful not to cause a scene. "You know what this looks like, don't you?" I said softly. "It looks like a woman caught red-handed. And there's only one way out." Melissa grabbed my arm. "Please, baby, let's go talk somewhere private. We can fix this." But I was done. "No," I said, pulling my arm away. "We're not going anywhere." Then I turned to Jeremy, my voice still controlled. "Here's how this goes. You convince her to sign those divorce papers. After that, you can have her. I won't stand in your way. But if either of you makes this difficult, if I even sense hesitation, then I hand over every piece of evidence to your wife, to your boss, to HR, and to the board." His face drained of color. "I'll make sure Sarah knows exactly what kind of man you are. And by the time I'm done, your marriage, your job, and your reputation will be gone. I really don't want it to come to that. So do us all a favor, get the papers signed." Melissa sobbed uncontrollably. "Jack, please, we have kids. Don't do this. Think about them." I looked down at the woman I once shared everything with. Her betrayal had burned through me like fire, but now it just felt cold. "I did think about them," I said. "They deserve a father who respects himself." I walked away then, letting the weight of my words settle over the table like a storm cloud. When I returned 20 minutes later, Melissa was still there, makeup smudged, fingers trembling. The papers lay in front of her, untouched. "So," I asked quietly, "have you signed?" She looked up at me, her eyes full of the kind of sorrow that comes too late. She looked up at me with tear-filled eyes, locked in on mine, and said softly, "Jack, I'll do whatever you want. I'll sign the papers. But, could you give me 1 week? Just a week before you make anything final?" I didn't say a word. I just stared. She pressed on. It's for the kids. So I can help them understand. So they don't think their mother just vanished. My silence was heavy. Her voice grew desperate. Please, let me preserve just a shred of dignity in their eyes. I know I don't deserve much, but I'm begging you, let me be the one to talk to them. Let me say goodbye properly. I nodded once. Cold. Controlled. You've got 7 days, I said. But after that, I want you out. She exhaled, trying to collect herself. I turned to Jeremy, who still sat frozen, his drink untouched, his face drained of all color. I leaned in just enough for only him to hear me. Your fate, I said calmly, is in my hands now. And make no mistake, I'm holding your future. So don't mess with me. He swallowed hard. I could tell he wanted to speak but thought better of it. You're lucky, I added. You have no idea how close I came to following through on my original plans for you. Don't push your luck. Melissa looked stunned. Jeremy? He just gave me a slow, stiff nod. As I turned to leave, I wondered whether they still felt like finishing their little date night after all that. Somehow I doubted it. But just as I reached the doorway, Melissa grabbed my arm. Wait, she whispered. That confidence, that fire in you, I saw something tonight I haven't seen in years. Something that you never showed with me. You dressed like that for him. You smiled at him. You impressed him. I know he made you feel something. I watched you make the effort I haven't seen in so long. I pulled my arm free. I know, I said. I heard it. Over and over in those videos. The praise. The flirting. The way you talked about me like I was some clueless, dull placeholder in your life. She tried to interrupt, but I raised a hand. You lied. You hid things. You made me the fool. And you know what? I'm not even angry anymore. I'm just disappointed that you were that foolish. If I'm missing something, I added, now's your chance to say it. Otherwise we're done talking. She was trembling. Jack, you gave me everything. You were everything. And I love you, despite everything you've seen, despite what you think. I still love you. I shook my head, my voice quiet and calm. Then you should have shown it. Not to me but to us. You should have chosen love when it mattered. Not now when it's too late. She broke again, burying her face in her hands. I didn't comfort her. Not anymore. I'm not your enemy, I continued. But I can't be with a woman who throws away 15 years for cheap excitement. I can't sleep beside someone who talks about me like I'm an afterthought. You need help. You need counseling. And for your sake, I hope you take that seriously. I'll always be there for our daughters, I added, but I won't be your husband. You had your chance. You let it slip away. She nodded slowly, defeated. I turned back to Jeremy, who was trying to disappear into his chair. As for you, I said, you're going to help her get back on her feet once I kick her out. That's the price of your affair. I don't care how you manage it, put her up somewhere, cover her basic needs and keep her off my doorstep. He opened his mouth but I cut him off. If you don't, I said, my voice low and cold, your job is gone and your wife, Sarah? She'll know everything. Every detail. I'll make sure she gets the entire folder. He looked away. And if that's not enough to motivate you, well, let's just say you're lucky I chose to end this with words. I straightened up. This is what happens when you involve yourself with another man's wife. And then I walked out of that restaurant and into the night, knowing that whatever came next, it would be mine to build on my own terms.